do that. Okay, just a little note to anyone who's watching this on YouTube channel. We started out with some breakout rooms, so you are joining us in the process of this meeting of our book study. So does anybody want to unmute and share what they were talking about, the difference between revising and editing? Anybody want to unmute and share?
Well, the revising is making the big changes, deleting sentences, adding sentences, rearranging information, and editing is the punctuation, the capitalization. And is what we discussed is how finding that a lot of kiddos believe that when you say revising, they go right to the editing and they don't make those big changes.
Exactly, Cindy. I think you're right. And for so many students, they think, oh, I better check my spelling and my punctuation and my capitalization. That's revising, but that's what comes later. Editing is a much more mechanical process. So we're going to start talking about the unelaborated paragraph. Why use an unelaborated paragraph, and what the heck is an unelaborated paragraph? Basically, it's a paragraph that you would get if you created your single paragraph outline, and then you had your topic sentence and your concluding sentence, and you took your supporting details and put each one of those in a sentence, and you came up with a paragraph where all the sentences were quite short and just to the point, and not very interesting, and not containing very many details. And so that's an unelaborated paragraph. And what we want to do to practice revision is to elaborate on that paragraph and make it more interesting and include more information, maybe vary our vocabulary and so forth. So we'll be discussing that, and we'll be discussing the ultimate goals of revision, which are on page 114. And the recommended scaffolded steps on page 118. I'm just curious, can you, if anybody has been using this process in their classroom, has anybody been using revising the unelaborated paragraph in their classroom, or is this something new?
Just go ahead and put it in your chat if you have been using them or not. If
you've been using it, that would be great. The purpose of the unelaborated paragraph is really to support and teach students how to revise on works of writing. And we start out by using things that have been written by someone else, so that the student's not personally invested in what's written down on the paper. They feel more free to go ahead and revise if it's not their own work. And then with enough practice on the paragraphs that are not their own, they'll be able to own that whole revision process and apply that revision process to their own writing. So the general revision goals are to develop clarity and coherence in your writing, use some sentence strategies, incorporate substantive change into the piece of writing, which could be, as Cindy was saying, reorganizing things, adding things, changing the order. You want to come up with something that's smoothly flowing and logically connected as you move through your paragraph. So just remember that if you're going to have your students working on revising an unelaborated paragraph, make sure that the passage you give them doesn't include any errors that need editing, because we don't want them to get distracted by that when they're going through the revision process. I just kind of made a laundry list of revision techniques here. I thought that might be helpful. So one thing that we want to do, if we want this prose that's flowing and connected and logical and makes sense and is interesting, one thing we want to do is be able to expand our sentences to answer questions like who, what, when, where, why, and how. All those things we talked about in chapter 2. We also want to be able to combine sentences to show how one idea is connected to another idea. And very often we do that by using subordinating conjunctions, which tell us about the relationship between the ideas in one sentence and those in another sentence. We want to revise to vary our sentence types. Remember, we have declarative, interrogative, exclamatory, and a demand. And so we want to vary our sentence types, and we also want to vary our sentence structures. So we have some simple sentences, we have some compound sentences, and some complex sentences. We want to be able to improve our topic sentence and concluding sentence if they need that. We want to be able to vary our vocabulary and make it not only more varied, but more precise. We want to be able to add examples to our paragraph. We want to be able to use transition words and phrases to, again, connect our flow as we move through a paragraph or connect one paragraph to another. And we want to be able to use quotations, which are powerful, but we want to be able to do it in a contextualized way so that the quotes make sense in the context we're using them in. So here's an example, and we're going to go into breakout rooms to work on this. This is actually a sample that we pulled off of that Writing Revolution website. This example is no longer there. So if you see things on that website that you like, make sure that you download them while they're there so that you can use them. But things keep popping up all the time. So we had this downloaded, and it's just an example. At the bottom of this page, you can see an unelaborated paragraph. You can see these simple sentences. The Hidden Figures are famous. They were hired as NASA computers. They worked on experiments. NASA bought machine computers. They could do math faster than humans. They still double checked it. The Hidden Figures were important. So this is a paragraph that came from a single paragraph outline. It has a topic sentence. It has a concluding sentence, but we can revise to make this a lot better. And the instructions at the top, we're going to share this slide in your breakout room so that you have the directions of how we would like you to go about revising this paragraph. And before you start, over on the right-hand side are a few key points about Hidden Figures that you may or may not know. This is just an abbreviated form. And when you go into the Writing Revolution website and find an activity like this, they will have a link to a rather extensive article or video or whatever about the topic so that the kids really develop depth of knowledge in the content of what you're asking them to write about. But in this case, we've just we've done sort of a stripped down version of what was in the original Hidden Figures article, just enough to give you some information that you're going to need in order to revise this paragraph. So,
okay, are we ready for breakout rooms?
We're ready.
Okay, so here we are.
Resume recording. Okay, so we realized that's way too much to do in a breakout room in a small amount of time. But you kind of get the idea when looking at the directions, the revision directions of the kinds of things that you might ask your students to do. And maybe for a particular revision, you only want to give them 2 things to do the first time, or maybe just 1 thing, and then gradually build up. So if you, Jeannie, what were you going to suggest?
I was going to say, if you want to put in the chat, like, what would be the barriers or the challenges with an activity like this? Some of people are already putting in the chat, or how would your students benefit from this activity?
Yeah. And I think
so whatever you would like to put in the chat, like barriers.
I think one of the things that's probably the most difficult for us doing this today is that we haven't spent a long time reading articles about this content, right? So the content is all fairly new to us. But we're going to show you now. It would be an anticipated response that people might make. So you can see all of the language in red has been added through revision. So there's your positive, the Hidden Figures. Who are they? 3 Black female mathematicians are famous. Why? Because they helped move NASA technology forward. And then when, during the space race, and then listing their specific names, they were hired as NASA computers. And then they worked on experiments to improve planes and help engineers solve problems. And then adding a transition word eventually, right? A sort of a sequencing transition word. NASA bought machine computers. Although the computers could do math faster than humans, the women still double checked the computer's work to make sure it was correct. And then in closing, so again, a transition phase there. The Hidden Figures broke barriers to become highly respected NASA mathematicians. Of course, this is just one way that this paragraph could be revised. Everybody who revises this paragraph is going to come up with something different. There's no right revision and no wrong revision, but this is just one example of what you could do. So as we move, we want to move in our classrooms from using these unelaborated paragraphs that have been put together by someone, not the student, and we want to move toward independent student revision of their own writing. A couple of quotes here from page 118. The better the writer, the more times he or she will revise a draft. Not fewer times, but more times. And many lessons can end after revisions and edits. Often a polished final copy of an unelaborated or independently written paragraph is not necessary to achieve the lesson objectives. Oftentimes, especially if you're working on an unelaborated paragraph, it's not even going to have any edits initially. Maybe there are some edits that need to be made after the revisions if there are some mechanical errors there. But you can just end at that point and they've gotten out of the lesson what it is you want them to get out of the lesson. Another thing that they did mention in the book that I thought was kind of interesting is that as you get more experienced with writing, a lot of times people will start to revise while they're doing their first draft. It's not necessarily do your first draft, then do your revision. A lot of times, if you're experienced with doing revision, as you're doing your first draft, things will occur to you and you start combining sentences and whatever, so that a lot of the revision can be done during the drafting process, but only for those people who are more advanced writers and have had experience at the separate processes of doing a draft and then doing revision. So in the earlier chapters, we have addressed expanding sentences and combining sentences and so forth, things that we want to do in revision. But one of the things that's not really addressed in previous chapters, but is a revision technique that we want to be able to use, is to use transitions that create flow. Sometimes we call those transition signal words. So we want to watch for those in text. And we have different kinds of transitions. We have ones that guide us through time, a sequence of events, conclusion, in conclusion, or finally, or as a result. We have illustration transition words as we introduce examples or supporting evidence or explain something further. We have those change of direction transition words that contrast one thought with an opposite thought. And we have emphasis transition words and phrases that are going to prove or reaffirm a point that you've already made. So do look, I think this is really helpful to have for your class on page 123. There's a whole list of transition words and phrases that's divided into these different categories. And this, I know they say you can order this chart through the Writing Revolution website. You could also just make your own chart. But this is kind of thing that's, I think, what do you think, Jeannie? I think this is really helpful for students to have this list to choose from. You're muted.
I know as a middle school teacher, depending upon what we were doing, I always gave them a list, that support the transitions as well.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
it's very helpful. Absolutely.
Yeah. So here we're going to just practice transitions real quickly. And if you have your book and you open it to page 123, you can choose from transitions there. What we're going to do, the blue blocks are where we want to put a transition word. And
you're going to put it in the chat, right?
Yep, put it in the chat. And the first one is going to be a sequencing transition. And the second one, you can choose between a sequencing transition or an illustration transition. So,
Whether that or they could figure that out, which one needs to go in there,
oh,
depending
you can
upon what's
figure it out.
going on in the text, Mary.
True.
So go ahead, once you read the text, and go ahead and put your transition you think for sentence one should be.
And then we'll show you what we came up with.
Initially, for example, oh, don't show it yet, Mary, we only got 2 readings.
Oh, I think we
Okay, let's
have
let them
plenty
get
of
in there a
time.
little bit. Don't at first. I'll read them out. So we have eventually, we have first. Still waiting for some more. To begin with, excellent. Initially. Oh, initially got a second vote, third vote.
What about that second sentence?
Yep, let's go to the second sentence. What do you
Baldwin
think should go
published
there?
He published his first books after years of living abroad. He wrote his autobiographical novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, when he was living in Switzerland.
Later, great.
Yeah. Or, for example, or for instance, or as an illustration.
There.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. So,
All right, no, those are the ones that they're there, right? So for
yeah,
example, and
that's what was
notably.
chosen in the book. But so this example also came from that resource, that website for the Writing Revolution. And they have numerous things to read and then exercises like this. So let's look a little bit at quotations. Again, this is something that's not, they're important, but they're not covered explicitly in the earlier chapters. And I like what they said, that quotations are like orphans. They need to be integrated into new textual surroundings. So you're pulling this quotation from somewhere, you're putting it in your text, but you need to now you need to make it a home there, right? So one of the ways they suggest to do that is to use what they call the quotation sandwich, and that's described on page 132. And what you want to do is first you want to say, whose words are these? Who said this? Who's the quotation from? And then you want to put your quotation in with your appropriate punctuation and citation if you need to do that. And then after the quotation, you want to paraphrase it to tell what the quotation means. And then you want to describe or say, how does that quotation relate to the text that you're writing, the text that you've put that quotation into. So that's your sandwich. Your first thing is to say, who said it? Then you put your quotation in, then you explain the quotation and how it relates to your text. Editing is also not really covered in previous chapters, but I just wanted to stick it in here. Remember the differences that we talked about between revising and editing, and you can look on pages 133 to 136. And this is the point where you're going to go in and correct errors for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. After looking at everything that's involved in planning, drafting, and revising, doesn't editing seem like a really small little job? And sometimes it looms big in students' minds, like editing, this is going to be the big thing about my paper, but it's just correcting mechanical errors. It may be helpful to use proofreading marks to do that. And they also just mention in the book, I'm not going to go into it today, but just the importance of handwriting as a foundational skill, because especially at the lower grade levels, if kids are writing their papers out by hand, revising by hand, editing by hand, handing things in, they need to be fluent, and their handwriting needs to be fluent, and it needs to be readable, right? Okay, so that's pretty much it for revision, and we're going to move on to chapter 6, which is about revising, and we've got about a half hour to go. So I think we're doing pretty good for time. So here are, other words. Can you just type in the chat? What are some other words that we could use instead of summary? What's a synonym for a summary? And sometimes people,
Synopsis.
yeah, synopsis. That's the first thing that comes into my mind when I think about it. But it can also be like a brief statement or the main point, right? Any of those things. And so we're going to be talking about not only what a summary is, but what the benefits of summarizing are. And we'll see that a lot of the techniques, a lot of the things that we worked on and that your students would work on from chapters 2 and 4 come back into play here when you're working on summarizing. So page 139 talks about some benefits of summarizing. And then one of the important things, especially, you've gotten the picture now, right? That the writing revolution, it's kind of, I think of it as two main ideas that are coming together. It's the importance of the sentence level writing skills and the explicit instruction of those, but it's also using writing to aid reading comprehension. So you're using it in your content areas to aid comprehension, and it's going to boost our reading comprehension. That's one of the benefits of summarizing. It also helps generate concise and accurate responses to questions. We use sentence expansion for summarizing. There are some grounding questions on page 141, 142 about summarizing. And then we have 3 different format choices that they give us for summarizing that are on 142 to 145. And we'll look at those briefly. So here are some of the guiding questions. Describe the benefits of teaching students to summarize. What are the 3 summarizing formats and which one works best for your students? What will you commit to trying? And what support do you need to make summarizing work better for your class? So on our subsequent slides, we're going to look at this a little bit more. Here is from page 139, reasons that writing summaries is beneficial. Boost comprehension, generate concise and accurate responses to questions, maintain that really important focus on the difference between the main idea and the supporting details. It helps with paraphrasing. It provides practice on taking information from multiple sources and then synthesizing that information and putting it together. It enhances our ability to analyze information. It develops our ability to make generalizations, and it aids in retaining information, our recall. So not only boosting comprehension, number 1 on our list, understanding what you're reading, but also number 8, retaining what we've learned from our reading, our recall. So those are all benefits to writing summaries. Amy had this slide in. I thought it was interesting. Coming out of the book, Bloom's taxonomy considers summarizing a level 2 skill, which is a pretty low level skill, and they're implying that it's low level. But why could that be misleading? According to the authors of the writing revolution, why could that characterization of summarization as a level 2 skill, why could that be misleading? And what impacts the difficulty of the level of summarizing? If you want to stick in the chat some ideas that you have about why summarizing might not be as low level and easy a skill as we might assume if we just look at Bloom's taxonomy. Or if you want to unmute and give us your opinion on that, that would be fine also. We've got a few ideas coming in here.
Ooh. Ooh.
here's some things that affect how difficult summarizing is. So sometimes summarizing is a pretty easy task if you have really easy text that you're summarizing. But the complexity of the text, the syntax, in other words, the grammatical structure of the sentences, whether it's complex or not, and the depth of knowledge that the students already have on the topic, all of these three things can affect how difficult it's going to be to do that summarizing. So it may be a lot more difficult than you anticipate. Here's some things that research says about writing summaries, and this is from page 140. Students, the first one I think is really important. Studies on students in grades 3 through 12, so all the way from 3rd grade through 12th grade, found that writing summaries had a greater positive effect size than rereading the text multiple times, reading and studying a text, or receiving instruction in reading comprehension skills. So when we're thinking about using summaries as a tool to boost reading comprehension, we know that it's going to be more effective than any of these three strategies, which are strategies that are often used in the classroom. So if we understand that writing a summary is going to be more effective than these strategies, we're more inclined to do it more often, I believe. And then a study of 800 students showed that when students wrote summaries in their own words, rather than just copying them, they scored significantly better on exams. Which only makes sense, right? Because they're having to process the information as they write it down and come up with their own analysis of distilling the main idea and how is it related to the subordinate ideas. So if you do it on your own, you're going to score better on your comprehension. So summarizing, sentence expansion, and the single paragraph outline all require similar skills and cognitive routines. We use those question words. Remember when we were talking about expanding sentences and we have a simple sentence and then we'd say who or what or when or why and use that to add that information to the sentence. We do the same thing that we normally would do in sentence expansion or in coming up with details in our single paragraph outline. We do the same thing when we summarize. We use question words. We have to distinguish between essential information and non-essential information. We use our note-taking skills. So all of summarizing goes back and leans heavily on the skills that students have developed when they practice sentence expansion and single paragraph outlines. So before you have your students summarize, though, you want to ask these questions of yourself. Do your students have sufficient knowledge of the topic to summarize it successfully? Who's the audience that they're doing the summary for? What's the purpose of the summary? Is it just to have the main idea, or is your summary going to lead you to writing a paper on that topic? And what's the format of the summary? Is it going to be a single sentence? Is it going to be a single paragraph outline? Or is it going to be what they call a combined outline? So we can use any of these formats, but different formats might lend themselves to different purposes of the summary. I think I'm going to skip this little video. This is a 3rd grade class. They're working with the writing revolution. And he's giving them, they've read a lot about Thomas Edison, and they've talked about who he is, what he did, when he lived, where he lived, why he was working on these things, how he developed the inventions that he did. So they've read all about that. And he wants his students to write a single sentence summary about Thomas Edison. And this video just shows them going through the process. And so I think it's a little bit difficult to understand what they're saying. So I'm not sure that it would be productive to use our time on that, but I want to show you some of the, see if I can move beyond this. sometimes I get stuck on here. There we go. So these are some of the sentences that fourth grade students came up with after studying Thomas Edison. Summary sentences, putting what you think is the most important about Thomas Edison into a single sentence. And you can see that some people's are more stripped down and others have more details included in them. So the first one, Thomas A. Edison invented and innovated to improve the world and make things better. Number two, and you can see we have not edited this because innovated is spelled in a very unusual way because that's the way the student spelled it. For 65 straight years in the United States, Thomas A. Edison improved, invented, and innovated things, but Thomas A. Edison had to experiment to make things better. There's a lot of information. You can see you can almost get inside that student's brain thinking when, where, how long, what, how, right? And then the third one is in the United States for 65 straight years. That this phrase must have been in there in what they read. For 65 straight years, Thomas A. Edison invented and innovated to improve people's lives. So I think that that's pretty good for summary sentences from fourth grade students. And maybe, how could you use these if you were going to move on from this? I mean, the second sentence, I think it would be a great way to make sure that the purpose of writing sentence number two could be you're studying for an exam on Thomas Edison and you want to make sure that you know all the important things about what Thomas Edison did. And by putting that second summary sentence together, you're going in and pulling out all the details that you know about Thomas Edison. You're putting it in writing. It's going to make it easier for you to recall that. Your sentence number one, if you were asked to write something about Thomas Edison, this would make a pretty darn good topic sentence, right? If you were going to move on from your summary sentence to make a single paragraph outline, you've got a great topic sentence right here. Or maybe number three could be your concluding sentence in a single paragraph outline. So you can see that you can use these for different purposes. You can use them for studying, for recall, to make sure you understood something, but you can also use them to move on into a single paragraph outline that you might then use to produce your own writing on that topic. So these are copies of templates from the Writing Revolution. The one on the left is a sentence summary, and it's who or what did what, when, where, why, and how. And then you can put all that into a summary sentence. As clearly, that student who wrote sentence number two on the previous slide, he was following this very closely. Then another way of writing a summary is to do maybe not a single paragraph outline, but a combined outline. So starting with the same thing as in the sentence summary, who did what, when, where, why, how, and then you get your summary sentence from that. And now use that summary sentence as basically a topic sentence, and now come up with 4 supporting details that go underneath that, and then come up with a concluding sentence. So you can see what you've done. You've taken your sentence summary, and in the process of converting to a single paragraph outline, you've used the sentence summary to come up with your topic sentence. Then from there, you move on to complete your single paragraph outline. So that's why they call it a combined outline. You're combining the sentence summary with the single paragraph outline. So when do you think you would use a sentence summary as opposed to a combined outline?
Hey, Mary, we had a question in a chat here. Are single sentence summaries the same as the main idea?
Yeah, I would say they are the main idea, but they can be, you can create different levels of detail within that single sentence summary, right? So it could be, you can include the kid who did this one. Look at number 2. It's the main idea, but sentence number 1 is the main idea. Sentence number 2 already has some details. hooked into it, right? So I think it is the main idea, but you can incorporate some of your details in there. For instance, you're going to have the who and the did what, but these other aspects, when, where, why, and how, are things that you can incorporate in that sentence summary. And it's still the main idea that you can go on and you can elaborate further on that, but it's still the main idea. Yeah, it's kind of confusing, I think, because once you answer the when, where, why, and how, you've already, in certain way of thinking about it, you've gone a little bit beyond the main idea and you've added some detail in there, some supporting detail. But it's the main idea that you want to use, and it's something that then will serve as a good topic sentence. And then you see over on the combined outline, using the when, where, why, and how to really come up with a very elaborate summary sentence. And then moving on from there to come up with four details that further elaborate on that before you go on to your concluding sentence. So yes, I would say it's the main idea. All of these summaries are main ideas. So were there any ideas in the chat about when you would use a sentence summary versus a combined outline?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Well, I think
We can probably move on.
okay. Well, we're almost at the end, so we're going to have 15 minutes of questions. So let me just move back to this for a second.
We do have one person, a combined outline would be good for a book.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a paper, right? An essay on something. And I think a sentence summary would be good for if your instructions were to give the main idea of something or to see if you understood.
I know when I'm asking my middle school students, when we're doing short stories, one of the standards is an objective summary, that the combined outline would be excellent for middle school students to write a concise and succinct objective summary, whereas a sentence summary might be more beneficial for the lower elementary in writing a summary of a short story, of a book, of a novel.
You're not going to be giving that, in my opinion, you're not going to be giving this combined outline to students who are under the earliest. What would you say? 4th or 5th grade would be the earliest that you would use the combined outline.
5th grade.
Maybe 5th grade. Yeah.
Yeah, because I believe the first time in the standards that I think of in Wisconsin ELA standards, they write an objective summary in 6th grade.
Yeah. But starting with these sentence summaries when and the kids are in the primary grades.
Well, and they could even use it in a picture. If you're reading a picture, they could write a sentence summary if they're reading a picture. They could write a sentence summary if they're reading a piece of artwork, any kind of reading.
Right. I think it's good to be able to develop that skill of pulling out the main idea or your main impression or whatever it is you're working on. And there are so many ways to do that with kids. Even if they can't write them yet, you can have them have their sentence summaries orally, right? So that you can, and the better they get at that and practice doing it, then you're not going to run into the situation so often in 6th grade where the kids can't even write a sentence summary.
Right.
Forget about moving on to the combined outline. They're stuck on the sentence summary because they've never worked at that before. They don't know how to do it. So I think that's one of the things about this book that I like, is it kind of takes you through, there's something that you can use at each grade level to help with your learning. So resource exploration, don't forget that we have the Padlet. And
now I had a question in the chat, Mary.
Okay. Yeah.
If you could share the Padlet in the chat again. So are you comfortable in clicking on that bit.ly and putting it in the chat?
I'm just going to do this because I don't want to, sorry. I have to get back to, I'm going to go way back. You'll get to watch me scroll through all these slides. A good, nice backward review, right? Almost there.
There you go. So if you want to click that link there, copy and paste that link and put it in the chat.
That's where we're going.
Okay.
Okay, so this is, oops, I want to do this to everybody. There's nobody in the waiting room anymore.
Right.
Okay, so
There it
that's the bit.ly link. And before I forget, I want to also put
We had
this
one more
in.
request though, Mary.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you make a copy of this slideshow and put it in the chat? Some
Hold
people
on a
were
second.
asking me, Amy has been giving them the copy of the slides.
Yes, that's, I'm going to post the link to the participant copy of today's slides. Just takes me a while to get them all and put them in there.
I think we just got that. Because I clicked on that first link and it took me to the slideshow.
The bit.ly link or the,
No, the first one you put in, the Google link.
okay.
And the second one you put in, it looks like is, I don't know yet.
Okay, well, let me,
That looks like a request for,
if you want to,
Attendance
if you want to
certificate.
request a certificate of attendance, I just
Yeah.
put that message in there.
well, the first link you put in took me to the slideshow, I'm pretty sure.
And the
Did it tell you?
slideshow will have the link to the bit.ly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, sorry, that's,
thank you.
Yeah.
all right. So you've got a bunch of links here at the end. If you do want a certificate of attendance, please click on that link and it'll take you to a real simple form. All you need to do is put in your name and your email address. And please fill out that form today because I'll be sending those all out in one batch tomorrow. So it's helpful if your names are there, then we can do it all at once. So we've got about 10 minutes to go, a little less than 10 minutes. And if people have questions, please unmute and ask us your questions and we'll see if we can have a little discussion about it. And meanwhile, I'm going to stop recording for our people who are watching on YouTube.